Good evening all, and welcome to tonight's discussion. Tasmania's Injustice, Foodless in the Food Bowl is brought to you as part of the University of Tasmania's Island of Ideas public talk series. As a reflection of our institution's recognition of the deep history and culture of the island, the University of Tasmania wishes to acknowledge the Palawa people. The Palawa are the traditional owners of Lutruwita, the land on which the broadcast is happening today. We pay deep respect to the elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their deep history of storytelling, knowledge sharing and caring for land. Indeed, it's quite poignant with tonight's discussion that we have much to learn from First Nations people globally about the understanding and how to be food secure. I'm Professor David Adams. I'm your host, MC for this evening. I have a longish history in public-private community sector life, advocating for food security, and most importantly, I think, trying to get the food security conversation to the centre of public policy rather than being on the margins. This is part of the Island of Ideas series. The series commenced amid the 2020 lockdowns as a way of keeping our community and ideas connected when the university was unable to host face-to-face events. Sharing knowledge and innovating to create solutions to emerging issues is an important part of our university culture. We no longer limit conversations to our teaching spaces and corridors. We have these discussions across land borders and waterways, a small gift from an otherwise horrific global pandemic. The Island of Ideas program continues in the hope that the university can collect the ideas for and from people of Tasmania into a global network where we can collaborate and discuss emerging issues and work together towards a better future. Today's topic is around food security and the food paradox, which Sandy will talk to. To introduce the concept, I'd just like to mention three interesting observations. Firstly, that food security is a very broad church. It includes perspectives or framing from agriculture, such as around food as a commodity, supply and demand, in particular security of supply. So second, framing around the idea of local versus global food systems and how they may interrelate and where solutions to food security might lie. There's a strong field of food security from health around nutrition and regulation. There's an emerging field around ecological debates, for example, around genetically modified foods. And then there's also the debate that we're going to focus a little more on tonight, which is the debate about a broad church with different labels such as food rights, food justice, food sovereignty, food equity. To some extent, this field that we're talking about tonight is just as interested in the redistribution of food as it is in the production and distribution of food. My second observation is that if you jump into Chat GPT or the Bard on Google, you'll notice that the main ostensible causes of food insecurity have two words: poverty and affordability. If, however, you look at most of the publications, including our own Tasmanian Food Security Strategy, which you have the link to, I don't think you'll find either of those words. So food security is an essentially contested concept in public policy. My final observation is that whilst we talk about food systems, there really is no food system as such. With all the framing that I mentioned, there are lots of bits of systems, at best a patchwork quilt that only just hangs together. And in Tasmania, for example, there are some 40 pieces of legislation related to food security, some 7 portfolios with responsibilities, but no minister. So unlike health, education, housing, for example, food security is yet to be understood or organised as a system. So tonight is hopefully another step on the way towards making some sense of that. So to our speakers, Joining us tonight are four experts in speaking order. I'd like to welcome, first of all, Sandy Murray. Sandy's a lecturer in food, nutrition and public health at our university. Sandy draws on more than 30 years of experience as a dietitian and public health nutritionist and teaches food, nutrition and public health at the university whilst undertaking her PhD, which is exploring food justice in Tasmania as a leader for change. Andrew Hillier is the CEO of Loaves and Fishes Tasmania. Loaves and Fishes is a Tasmanian free statewide food provider. They provide about 60% of the state's emergency food relief, feeding around 16,000 people each week. Patricia O'Duffy is the General Manager of the Northern Subs Community Centre. The centre provides a range of services from health, education and leisure and personal development to the people of Rochelle, Mayfield, Newnham, Mowbray and Invermay, and operates neighbourhood houses from 3 sites, Newnham, Mowbray and Rochelle. Finally, we'll hear from Professor Alana Mahn, food activist, author and head of media at the University of Tasmania. Alana's an interdisciplinary scholar researching the power relations between media, government, institutions and citizens in the field of food politics. So without further delay, please welcome our first speaker, Sandy Murray.
Thanks very much, David. Hi everyone, my name is Sandy Murray and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on where I'm presenting today, which is the Gubbi Gubbi people in the Sunshine Coast. So I'm based up in Queensland just for a couple of weeks and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. So my presentation will set the scene for our conversation tonight about being foodless in the food bowl. I will present findings from the Tasmania Project's food security prevalence surveys over 4 periods of time during and following the COVID pandemic. I would like to acknowledge my colleagues before I begin from the Tasmania Project, who I've worked with very closely for the last couple of years, including Catherine Kent, Sebastian Kokar, Dennis Vincenton, Amy Seawright and Libby Lester. It's been a great team working together. It really worked really well. Thank you. So before I share the findings of the Tasmania Project, I want to describe to you how we are defining food security this evening. And David provided you with the lens on which we will be focusing on food security. But just to delve into it a little bit more, food security at its basic level is about people, families and households being able to access good food every day. It has multiple dimensions and I'll describe 6 of those dimensions that which is the lens we're looking through this evening. So food availability, which is about sufficient quantities of food and appropriate quality food. The second is food access, which includes financial and physical access. Food utilization, which is all about food skills and knowledge. Food stability, which refers to access at all times. Number 5 is whether people have agency, which means whether people have the capacity to make decisions about their food, and sustainability, which refers to the viability of the ecological and social aspects of the food that they're consuming. On the other hand, food insecurity is when people, families and households struggle to access good, healthy food every day in a socially acceptable way. So whilst often we think of low-income countries in terms of food insecurity also occurs in higher income countries such as Australia and in states like Tasmania. So the experience of food insecurity includes concerns about running out of food and not being able to afford to buy more, the inability to afford a balanced diet, going hungry, missing meals, and in extreme cases, not eating for whole days because of a lack of food and not having enough money. Therefore, food insecure people are much more likely to suffer from chronic physical and mental health problems, which can have profound influence on the state's health system, if we're thinking of it from a state-based perspective. So then when it comes to the Tasmanian food paradox, which David mentioned, what we know is that we grow some of the best fruits and vegetables in Australia, here in Tasmania. But unfortunately, we have some of the worst health outcomes in the country. We are a gourmet lover's paradise, as I think most of you know, and our food tourists know, and our visitor economy knows. And we are proudly self-sufficient. But you may be surprised that many Tasmanians are going hungry and or are compromising the quality of the food that they're eating. I'm now going to share with you the findings from the Tasmania project, which was established by the University of Tasmania to give the people of Tasmania a voice and to gather important information that can support good decision making through the community. So during and following the COVID pandemic, our research team from the Tasmania project, which is part of the Institute for Social Change here at University of Tasmania, conducted surveys, interviews, focus groups among Tasmanian residents and gathered that information together and produced resources, both available to community and decision makers. And these reports have informed state government agencies and community organisations, including the PESRAC report back in 2020 and 2021, which is the Premier's Economic and Social Recovery Action Committee, the recently launched Food Relief to Resilience Food Security Strategy and Action Plan as well. So the findings have been really important. There's been a total of four Tasmanian project surveys reported following the COVID pandemic, reporting on the prevalence of food insecurity. So for more details, if you would like more information on the statistical methods that we used, that information is available on the website through University of Tasmania. All right, so let's have a look at those findings. To give you an understanding of how we fared during COVID, here are our prevalence findings from the beginning of the COVID pandemic in 2020 through to October 2022. They're stark, aren't they? So prior to the COVID pandemic, the Tasmanian Population Health Survey in 2019 reported 6.2% of Tasmanians were experiencing food insecurity due to financial stress. So that was to the left-hand side of my screen there. Then in May 2020, immediately following the 4 weeks in the lockdown in Tasmania, which reflected a time when shops were stripped bare and the prevalence of food insecurity actually increased to 28%. So it increased significantly to roughly 1 in 4 Tasmanians. Then in September 2020, when public health restrictions were eased for at least 3 months, and there were no community transmissions, the prevalence of food insecurity reduced back down to 20%. We assumed it would probably progress down. Then in May 2021, when the temporary COVID coronavirus supplement ended on the 31st of March 2021, the prevalence remained largely the same as September 2020, so at around 23%. And most recently, in October 2022, so just last year, when the cost of living crisis was starting to be felt, Tasmanian households' experience of food insecurity in the prior month increased to 50.6%. So that's 1 in 2 Tasmanian households experiencing food insecurity, which is double the rate recorded in May 2021. So let's now hone in then on that 50.6 or 51% of people who were food insecure in October 2022, and break it down into the severity of food insecurity. So what we found was that approximately 7% of people experienced marginal food security, which means they worried about running out of food and or they had limited food selection due to a lack of money, which was similar to the levels reported in 2021. Then if we go to low food insecurity, which is the orange column, approximately 23% experienced low food insecurity, which means that they compromised on their quality and quantity of foods that they were purchasing due to lack of money, which was double the level reported in 2021. Then if we go to the red column, on your right, approximately 20% experienced very low food security, which means they missed meals, reduced their food intake, and at the most extreme cases went days without food. And this tripled from the levels reported in 2021. Hence, not only is food insecurity alarmingly high, but most people who were food insecure were experiencing more severe impacts. So, who were most affected? The groups of Tasmanians most at risk and were most affected and were experiencing food insecurity and whom urgent and targeted interventions and support are required is pictured in this table. I know it's quite a detailed table, but if you start from the column on the left-hand side, we can see that our younger adults, 18 to 24 years, are quite vulnerable. Our unemployed Tasmanians, our temporary residents, our single adults with dependents, our Tasmanians living with disability, our single person households, our kind of 24 to 44-year-old adults, and then our high school leavers. These groups of Tasmanians were the same as for those in our previous surveys. So those most vulnerable during COVID and post-COVID, it hasn't changed. It actually does remain the same. I have a number of quotes here that the survey picked up as well, which provides information on people's coping strategies and how they coped through the pandemic, and many people didn't cope very well. What we found was that more than half of Tasmanians experiencing food insecurity reported their diet was fair, poor, or very poor. A third sought food from their social networks to cope. A quarter reported borrowing money for food or buying food on credit even. Only a minority of food insecure households, 10%, sought emergency food relief from a provider. So this is an unfolding crisis. The Tasmanian government has responded to this issue through policies such as the Food Relief Fund, which provided funding to food relief organisations to support people experiencing food insecurity. And the most recently launched strategy called the Tasmanian Food Security Strategy from Relief to Resilience, as well as the action plan. I'd also like to acknowledge the work of the Tasmanian Food Security Coalition, who have contributed to this strategy and action plan as well. So there is a clear and current reliance. So it is clear that the current reliance on emergency food relief models is not helping the majority of our food insecure Tasmanians. And there is an urgency to do something about this. So I'd like to conclude with a thought. And I wanted to highlight that food insecurity is not a production problem, but it is a social problem. The right to adequate food is a fundamental human right, recognizing that we can't have authentic food security without participation, accountability, non-discrimination, transparency, human dignity, and empowerment, which is illustrated in the image here. This human right is based on the basic principles of the UN Human Rights Declaration. And by adopting a rights-based approach to food, governments and other stakeholders can prioritise policies and actions that aim to eliminate the barriers to food access and improve food systems in a way that uphold human rights. The rights-based approach also emphasises empowering individuals and communities. And this can be related back to food policies and programs that are in place at the moment. So their voice is really important. So with that, I'd like to end and hand back to David, and I thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks for the great framing of the issue and the, as you said, rather stark scale and scope of what appears to be an unfolding and a growing challenge to society. Having presented the evidence, it's good now we can move to what it might feel like on the ground by handing over to Andrew Hillier from Loaves and Fishes. Just before I do that, Andrew, I'd just like to remind people that at any time during the discussion, they can put in a question in the Q&A function at the bottom of their screen. So I'd like to invite our next speaker, Andrew Hillier. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, David, and good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to be part of this because really it thrills me to see people in struggling circumstances transformed for a better life and given some dignity and some hope in the tough times. And as Loaves and Fishes, we have a one-liner that we use, and you'll probably see it behind me, and that is that we seek to deliver food and hope. And in a beautiful place like Tassie, known for being the outstanding food bowl of Australia, the fact of not being able to put food on the table and having to face food hunger seriously is an absolute injustice. And it's something that I'm passionate about trying to do something about. And I know that many others are joining me in that journey. For many struggling Tasmanians, the distance between no longer needing to rely on food relief and being resilient enough to grow or purchase and prepare and eat safe and nutritious food, that gap's a big one. Our current challenges around the cost of living that many of us are aware of have made this even more so. We must not lose sight of this reality because it is a reality. We must continue to properly resource the immediate needs that are before us and at the same time work towards the longer term changes that are needed. Loaves and Fishes Tasmania is committed to this process and the journey and operates with a commitment to both providing relief and supporting towards a resilient future. So we're strongly backing the relief to resilience strategy that the state government have released recently in terms of the action plan. And we're supporting that process, and we are working together with many others across the state to do something about this. So what does Loaves and Fishes do? Loaves and Fishes Tasmania currently serves as a key provider of emergency food relief, providing around 60% of the statewide emergency food relief. We distribute that food relief through 300 plus community agencies and food programs. Around 270 of those we service on a weekly basis. And then the others we provide supply to on a casual basis. Now, every week, Loaves and Fishes Tasmania currently is collecting between 20 to 25 tonnes of fresh produce, fresh quality Tasmanian produce from some of our amazing farmers and producers. And some of those are small farmers, some of them are larger farmers, but they're real champions and we appreciate that. In fact, the in-kind value of that produce is around $3 to $4 million a year. So we really appreciate their input. We could collect more though if we had the resources. Now, what happens with that? A portion of this fresh produce is used to produce nutritionally balanced, ready-to-eat meals for Tasmanians facing food hunger. Currently, we're producing around 9,000 meal serves every single week across both of our facilities. We have one in Devonport in the north and one in Rugby in the south where we produce those meals. The remainder of the food, the remainder of the fresh produce is distributed as fresh produce to all of our partner agencies across Tasmania. So what goes out each week? Around about 16 tonnes of fresh produce is going out to our agencies each and every week of the year. We minimise any waste by ensuring that no food waste or any food that isn't fit for human consumption. We make sure that that does not go to landfill. And the very small amount of waste that we have goes to stock feed or animal feed. Loaves and Fishes Tasmania also has a hamper program that the purpose of this program, and it's a smaller part of our work, but it provides 4 days of core food elements to support a family of 4. It's based on that anyway. These hampers are provided through both of our main centres in Devonport and Glenorchy, custom ordered by agencies. So those 270 agencies or 300 agencies can order a hamper. Currently, we're providing about 40 to 50 hampers a week in Devonport and around 50 to 60 in the Greater Hobart area. These include a base of approximately 10 kilos of vegetables and about 5 kilos of fruit, 5 kilos of main meals, eggs and bread. In some cases, we add pet food to that if the recipient is known to have has a pet, and any other available groceries are added as they are available. Loaves and Fishes Tasmania uses every opportunity of employment as also across our organisation to make a difference for Tasmanians doing it tough. So in total, we're currently providing about 35 plus trainees and also job opportunities for long-term unemployed. These jobs, they skill and employ vulnerable Tasmanian in the areas of hospitality, food preparation and distribution. The jobs come with essential wraparound support that help these people in need, giving them a supportive environment where they can grow and flourish in long-term employment and make a positive social contribution in time. Loaves and Fishes Tasmania also has a social enterprise arm which helps us fund our provision of food relief, education and training, and this includes catering, commercial food production. We have an olive grove with award-winning olive oil production, honey production, and a range of other boutique food products. I guess for Loaves and Fishes, we view the Tasmanian issue of food insecurity we endeavour to from a holistic perspective and provide our service as an organisation on that basis. The injustice of being foodless in a food bowl is not a standalone issue, and as Sandy talked about in her presentation, neither can the solution be a standalone. It's a complex issue, and that is why Loaves and Fishes Tasmania is working very hard to be innovative and adaptable and collaborative in how we help address hunger in Tasmania. So what are we seeing each day? What's our Loaves and Fishes team seeing every day on the ground? What are we seeing in our towns and communities as our team and work moves around? For many struggling Tasmanians, as I said a little earlier, the distance between no longer needing to rely on food relief and being able to take care of themselves enough to grow and purchase food, that's a big gap. And our current challenges are not helping that. And it's so important that we don't lose sight of that reality. We must continue to properly resource the immediate needs. That is when someone is faced with that crisis of not being able to put food on the table, and it's a very real issue as you've seen in those statistics earlier, whilst at the same time we must work on ways that enable people to be resilient and take care of themselves. Every day, Loaves and Fishes is serving more than 16,000 Tasmanians, and that's mums, dads, boys and girls who are struggling to put food on the table. People have to make a choice between the necessities of life. As we often say, we have a bit of a phrase that we use, they have to make choices between, the choice may be between heating or eating, and that's particularly pertinent at this time of year as we enter winter in Tasmania. As we've heard, based on the UTAS study, 10% of people only are accessing the traditional forms of food relief. So this is a concern, as it means that probably out of the 16,000 is really only a small portion of those who are really needing our help. So what is Loaves and Fishes? What's our view on how we can help change things? I guess there's 5 things I'd like to just leave in wrapping up that we're doing as an organisation to make sure that we can properly address the issue of food insecurity and food hunger in Tasmania. Firstly, we're not working alone as an organisation. We're seeking to work together with our 300 plus community champions around the state, our agencies. We see them as the champions on the front line, serving and caring for people, distributing the food that we provide to them. We don't work alone. We're working as part of the Food Security Coalition to try and address the real needs. We're working from a position of really understanding the needs, and that's why we really value the work that UTAS have put into this. We're committed to making sure that we supply nutritionally balanced food and meals. This is a very, very important thing when we're trying to address the long-term impacts of food insecurity. Make sure that people are eating the right food. We provide education and training where we can, as we are with our trainees. And we always stand ready to change, adapt to new and innovative community-based solutions. Those 5 things are important to us as we seek to work with many other Tasmanians to address the issue of food insecurity here in Tasmania. I want to thank you for allowing me to share with you this evening, and I look forward to hearing from the others this evening.
Thanks, Andrew. It's great to see such insights from on the ground, and also great to see organisations essentially struggling with the dilemma of how to both provide services and also tackle some of the structural and institutionally underlying challenges. There's a very good question we'll perhaps come back to at the end, which is, if I rephrase it, it would be just whose responsibility is food security. Surely it's not just the community sectors. So we'll move on now to Trish Duffy, again, a very hopefully pragmatic view of what actually happens in one of our ostensibly most vulnerable areas in Tasmania, in the northern suburbs. So welcome, Trish, to the screen.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody. I'm very privileged to be among such esteemed colleagues. I work quite closely with Sandy and Andrew, have the privilege of working with them. And as they both said there, we're working collaboratively to address this huge issue of our times. Northern Suburbs Community Centre is one of 35 houses statewide. We're a neighbourhood house, and we're funded through the Department of Premier and Cabinet to provide place-based activities. But of importance is that we are community-led and driven. So we're each individual incorporated associations. We can't function without our volunteers, local people on the ground. And we are governed by a volunteer board made up of local community members that know their community. So why we do what we do is our community reach out to us and say, these are the issues, and let's work together to help solve that. And that's why it's really important that we act locally, but also are aware of it statewide. So together, collectively, we can make an impact. I'll just share slightly some of the insights from Northern Suburbs, because Sandy and Andrew have gone through the problem, which really is what we're seeing on the ground locally. The statistics that Sandy talked about earlier in that age group of 18 to 24 is very much my experience on the ground and talking to young people, particularly those that might have moved out of home. They can no longer afford to buy fresh food to produce. It's just not affordable. And so they're resorting to fast food, which then brings on health problems and impacts upon motivation and that. A lot of our older community access our loaves and fishes, the fresh produce that we get from loaves and fishes. Some of the younger people struggle with cooking food. And so there's a problem there, not just for food insecurity, but also around knowledge and skills that might not always have been passed down as in previous times. I would like to move on to the solution part of our project, because this has been a big project for us in Northern Suburbs, working with Sandy. We did a lot of chat and choose in the Northern Suburbs last year, and we moved to chat and do's, as we call them. So we first looked at in across all of Northern Suburbs, working with my colleague Nettie Burr in Starting Point Neighbourhood House. We asked communities, so what is the issues that you're seeing? And we looked at all that, and what are the possible solutions? And one of the solutions that we came up was the Food and Resilience Movement, we called it, which is the Farm Project. We were fortunate enough to get funding to employ 3 gardeners and a program coordinator. And of relevance to this, it's a multifaceted approach and solution-based locally. We will develop a social enterprise over the 5 years, but part of that journey is engaging local community, being involved in their own solutions. We have working bees happening at the moment, which a lot of the community are mobilising and getting involved with. They're learning how to grow their own vegetables and produce. They're learning how to do seed propagation. They're learning about budgeting, nutrition, cooking. We know that this will be a long-term development action plan. We know it will take time. However, part of our process is that when we employ local people, both in employment and also engaging in volunteer activities, we get them involved in being the solution to the problem. So we're continually growing, if you pardon the pun, we're continuing growing our solving problem. But also we're creating a space where it's social inclusion. So somebody living alone that used to donate their extra produce, the older people that they grew in their gardens to the house, are now getting involved. And that intergenerational sharing of knowledge is happening. We've only just started in January, and already we can see great things happening in this space. I think it's important that we recognise that food security is becoming more and more a monetary problem, access to fresh fruit and produce. It's that choice between, do I buy a packet of ready-made noodles, as a lot of the students tell me they buy, as opposed to buying fresh produce where they can get nutritional value. And that really impacts upon health. So if we can teach people how to grow their own, even if they're living in a small flat, they can grow stuff in pots. That's where we aim to get to in budgeting. So thank you for your time this evening.
Thanks, Trish. Again, some great insights, very much on the ground, and in particular the linking of addressing food insecurity to the idea of community-based empowerment and change, and essentially by default introducing the concept of local food systems. And we can see from various questions being asked that many of us are unclear, as it were, how important the local versus the institutional structural changes approach ought to be. Thanks, Trish. And so hopefully our final speaker, Elena, can bring everything together for us. Over to you, Elena.
Thanks, David, and thank you, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be on a panel, not only with academic colleagues, but also with the people who are really making change happen on the ground, including Andrew and Trish. These are 2 organisations which are a really good example of something that I would like to talk about, which is the importance of building the capacity of the actors in the food system who are filling the gap that government seems to be unable to. And given, as Trish mentioned, the lack of living wage for many individuals and affordability being such an issue, that gap is not going to close soon. So how do we transition, as Andrew mentioned, from food relief to food resilience? I've got 3 main points, which I'll start up by stating, just to make my argument clear. First of all, food is very political. I love David's comment from the outset, which was food should be at the centre of public policy rather than at the margins. And fortunately, around the world, there are great examples of how putting food at the centre of all sorts of policies does improve people's standards of living and their health outcomes in many different ways. So my first point is political leadership at all levels of government is essential. My second point, which is really well addressed by Trish and Andrew, is that you need to base interventions on local needs. In other words, one size does not fit all when it comes to solving some of these challenges. And as Trish said, going to the community and involving them in the framing of the problem is a really important first step. Therefore, you get ownership and agency from the community, which greatly expands people's capacity to change their own situation for the better. My third point is investing in building the capacity of local actors and networks to make projects like these sustainable, and also enable them to, I guess, leverage a lot of the synergies that they're finding in the community. It's amazing how social enterprises are actually places where you find, and I love these qualities that Andrew mentioned, innovation, adaptability, and collaboration, which is where we see successful projects really working. Now, my position is really from an international research perspective, because I spent quite a lot of my early research career with an organisation, or researching an organisation called La Via Campesina, a global farmers movement. That is, in English, it means the peasant way. So these are 200 million small-scale farmers, fishers, landless workers, migrant workers around the world. They claim to be the world's largest social movement, and they speak a lot of sense. They've been around for more than 25 years now, and they have a seat in the civil society mechanism at the World Committee for Food Security, at the Food and Agriculture Organisation. They can't vote, unfortunately, but they're making a lot of noise about the rights of peasants, small-scale farmers, and eaters in our food system. What is really interesting about their representation is the claim, and it's there's evidence to support this, that often the people who produce our food are also experiencing food insecurity. And around the world, many of those are women and girls, and of course, our First Nations people. So what we really need to do is think about, as La Via Campesina says, who produces food, how do they do it, and for whose benefit. And the how we do it is becoming even more important as we face the challenges of climate change and the contribution of food production systems, especially industrial food production systems, including transport, distribution, and the costs of land clearing in terms of GHG emissions. Almost 40% of emissions can be attributed to those processes. So these are all really strong arguments for having local, resilient food systems and shorter supply chains. And so our political action needs to really operate at all stages of the food supply chain, from the production all the way through to the management of our distribution, transport systems, and of course, consumption, retailing, and the management of food waste. So we need to think about how we are to address these multiple challenges. Now, to try and frame this, I'm going to explain it in three ways. First of all, what is a vision that we might have in terms of this politicized food system that we do if we exercise all of our skills in innovation, adaptability, and collaboration, have the power to change. The vision is fair and sustainable local food systems where individuals and communities share the power to decide who grows what, for whom, and for whose benefit, in co-production with nature and with minimum impact on the environment, where local and regional plans are generated as part of a comprehensive national food plan, administered and led by diverse knowledge holders at the forefront of both impacts and insights, including First Nations people. What is the promise? What can we see that is happening around the world? And there is a lot of evidence that success is within reach. Vibrant community-based food systems that are stewarded through democratic governance operate in countries all around the world. And cities, increasingly, if you think of the agency that's been exercised through organisations like the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact Network, where cities have decided it's too late. We can't wait for countries to make plans. Local government plays a huge role. We're going to come up with our own innovations. These are place-based and specific to regional conditions. Many are scalable and offer models we can adopt and adapt. And the most successful are driven by the local change agents who are participating. As Sandy said, it's that participatory culture. And finally, where is this work happening and how can we encourage it and support it? There's a glaring disconnect, first of all, between narratives of productivity, for example, Tasmania, and the realities of food insecurity. Sandy painted a great picture of the realities of food insecurity. The Agri-Food Scorecard in Tasmania is very proud to report that we produce 5.5 times more food in Tasmania than the population can consume. So that fits very uncomfortably with the statistics around food insecurity. I just want to put a big shout out there to the great deal of work that's being done by people like Andrew, Trish, their organisations, regenerative farmers, agroecologists, social entrepreneurs, and all the community-based organisations who are changing both the conversation and the reality. And what I argue is that investment can help build their capacity to innovate, build and share solutions that address regional and national challenges in getting healthy, affordable and culturally appropriate food to all Australians without extracting food from our environments. So back to you, David. Thank you so much for giving me the floor.
Thanks, Lena, and thanks again for those insights, and again a focus on these ideas around local empowerment and elevated up to the idea that perhaps food security could become a social movement. And always recollect the historian E.P. Thompson describing class as the propensity of a group of people to think and act collectively. And I think all speakers tonight have talked about that as one key component in trying to shift the dial on food insecurity in Tasmania. So we've now got time for some questions from all of you, and perhaps I'll start, if I could, by referring to Andrew. There are 3 or 4 questions in here, Andrew, which are fairly practical ones about the funding and organisational arrangements for loaves and fishes. And so I'd just be interested if you might want to address those. So one, for example, from Milka is where does loaves and fishes get funding, or with business model used to provide job structures and distribution, for example. So perhaps just a little more, Andrew, on the nature of loaves and fishes.
Thanks, David. So currently, Loaves and Fishes receives around about 50% or thereabouts, 50% of our funding through the state government. The remainder of that we fundraise ourselves. Obviously, as I mentioned in my presentation, a massive component for us is the in-kind value and the in-kind donation of food, which equates to, can be between, depending on what value you put on it, but conservatively between $3 and $4 million worth of in-kind food per year.
Thanks, Andrew. There's a question here which is probably more for Trish, which is about what's the Northern Suburb Centre doing in the 5-year project. Will take time, but will create sustainability. How can this be rolled out statewide? Probably other speakers might wish to respond as well, but Trish, would be interested in your views on what it might look like to have a statewide approach.
Thank you, David. We believe that this project is very much transferable across the state. I mean, while it's a 5-year project, sustainability is the key in it, and we're looking to keep employment local. We're happy to share the project plan with whoever. It's a very simple model. It's about growing the produce, selling it at an affordable price, and the proceeds go back into employing local people. So yeah, it's very doable. And there is just another question there, David, that I've seen in relation to young people. It was remiss of me not to mention that in this project, we've got many partners, such as UTAS, but also 24 Carat, who are involved in schools. So we're doing, it's from 0 to 99 plus that we're addressing the community, teaching young people skills, but also generational. I just wanted to make that comment.
Thanks, Trish. Just move to a question from Liz, which probably for Sandy, but others might wish to contribute as well. And that's the question, are there any community programs in place to empower people to source or grow their own food, i.e. community gardens, wild harvesting, etc.?
I'm very impressed with the way 24 Carat have rolled out their program to now the north of Tasmania. They're very well established in the south and just moved to the north. And it's been really interesting for me to follow the life of a young person from primary school through to high school and then college. And we have a number of primary schools in the south whose young people have actually gone through the process of learning to grow, cook and eat good food, and then get to high school. And I understand that 24 Carat is then now going into high schools. And then, of course, when they get to college, they have their own food choices. But we're creating a culture, a long-term culture of resourcefulness around food, growing, cooking and eating. So for me, that's been a really interesting program. So it's long-term, and it's not a one-hit wonder where it's rolled out at the beginning of an election cycle. It's actually lasted over a period of time. So I think for me, that's a really interesting example, particularly of a young person developing those skills. But I'll stop right there. So that's one example from my perspective.
Thanks, Sandy. There's another question which, again, perhaps Andrew and Sandy, maybe the others would like to address, and that is, would any of the speakers like to comment how we can better utilise the 30% of food produced which currently goes into landfill? And again, this goes to this broad field of food, rescue food, salvage, the circular economy, and the question of what might the local and institutional settings be that can address this rather significant problem. Andrew, I know Loaves and Fishes do, as it were, food rescue. Perhaps let us know how that works, at least for your organisation.
Yes, certainly, David. Well, as I mentioned in my presentation, we're picking up from farmers around between 20 and 25 tonnes of fresh produce every single week. Now, a fair portion of that would, for a whole range of reasons, would otherwise potentially could get ploughed into the ground. There could be a whole range of reasons why that may be the case. So we're doing certainly everything we can in terms of playing our part in keeping that food out of landfill and making sure that it can be used to provide meals for those in need.
Look, from a circular economy perspective, I think there's a huge opportunity for us to do more with the food that would otherwise go to waste. It's a matter of getting our collective brains together, and I know a lot of people are working on this at the moment, but there's certainly a circular economy opportunity to do more with this food that would otherwise go to waste. And I'm always very conscious of trying to decouple food waste from feeding people, because one doesn't solve the other problem. Each are both very separate problems or concerns. And as the writer of this question says, food insecurity is not a social problem, not a production problem, it is a social problem. And if we do have all this excess food going to waste, let's do more with that food, or let's look at ways to reduce that waste rather than coupling one with the other to solve that problem.
Thanks, Sandy. A question from Leah. Hello, Leah. Most people who are food insecure are not engaging with these existing programs. What does the scaled response look like, please, Alana? Just before you respond, I'll note that Leah and I did some work some years ago around the role of local government in Tasmania, with the rather simplistic idea that perhaps the level of government closest to the people and communities might have more of an interest and capability in this area.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Leah. It's a great question, and you'd know, as an expert on challenges around public procurement, that scale is not a problem that is easily solved. We can see a lot of solutions that operate on a neighbourhood scale, as Trish has described really well. And I think, again, that's the secret, that people are food insecure for very different reasons, and therefore we need very different solutions. And we had a very good example in Sydney, a project that was funded by the Australian Research Council, Foodless Sydney. And we've talked about how do you take this concept, which is effectively a food business incubator, which helps people get training and employment in food to ensure their own food and food security, while also diversifying the local food economy. Great idea. We borrowed it from Food Lab Detroit, who did it in a city that was bankrupt in 2011 and had to feed itself when all the big businesses left town. And that started with African American women in their own kitchens feeding their neighbourhoods. And when you talk about scale, that project is amazing. It's scaled up, but not through creating big businesses. It's scaled up through creating many diverse businesses, like a constellation of actors who are really contributing to the local food economy and achieving profit alongside purpose. So again, I think scale, when we think about it, it's not just about reach or size, it's actually about how that innovation diffuses as different actors pick up the idea and run with it. And the way we were able to scale out from the LGA with Food Lab Sydney was by working in that ecosystem of really fantastic social enterprises who were already giving people all sorts of levels of support. So we had people doing Food Lab who were straight out of Too Good's work training program. Too Good, they actually give meals to domestic violence survivors and also train those survivors in the kitchen. So we're all working for the same purpose. So we were almost like a chain of support. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to, as Sandy said, really talk about the unique challenges in our specific areas of expertise in our geographic regions, and then think about how we share them, you know, around the world through our networks, as you've been really effective at doing, Leah.
Thanks for that answer. I'll try and group three together, one from Pat. Hello, Pat. One from Nick, more recent one from Evelyn. These are three questions that are all related to basically why don't we have the arrangements in Tasmania that might guarantee, for example, through legislation, food security? And Pat's question is, could I expand on lots of legislation but no minister for food security? And Evelyn's question is around land use regulation. These are all, people would know me, great areas of interest. And I'd note that in Tasmania, the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act and the Local Government Act, two very important pieces of legislation, are silent on food security as a goal. And part of the challenge is that when you have 40 pieces of legislation and no minister, you sometimes miss the most obvious goal, which is let's not have food insecurity in Tasmania. And part of the UK approach is the Bob Hawke revisited No Child Need Go Hungry, slightly modified. But institutionally, alongside community empowerment strategies, the question of how institutionally we could use the instruments of parliaments to try and drive change is really still relatively underdeveloped in Tasmania. And certainly some of the earlier questions as well around over-reliance on the community sector for what are institutional challenges are spot on in terms of how do we build from the sort of work that Andrew and Trish have talked about to also tackle these really hard questions, like using the word poverty to explain what food insecurity is actually like. So I'm not quite sure if any of our panellists know this. And Rob's question is there any data on the number of farmers who fall into this food insecure group? So maybe Sandy might know the answer to that.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rob. I don't have those figures at my fingertips, but I suspect we have colleagues, part of the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture probably do, I suspect. no particular reason why we don't have those figures. I guess it's because we've largely focused on the eater end of the conversation. But I suspect our Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture colleagues do. So that's a good question for us to pick up on and find the answer.
Thanks, Sandy. A practical question for Sandy. What was the criteria to join the Food Coalition? Does it still operate, and can it accept new members?
Yeah, no, thanks very much for that question. And Trish and Andrew can also probably respond to this as well. Yes, anyone, we have a terms of reference, and anyone who meets the terms of reference can certainly join the group. It's not closed, it's very, very open. And we have Carl Saunders from Eat Well Tasmania, who I guess informally chairs the group, and Andrew and Tricia are quite involved as well. Andrew and Trish, do you want to add to that? I just want to say it is very open, and you're very welcome to join.
Just to comment on that the group obviously has recently been formed, and as Sandy has mentioned, terms of reference have been established. And I'll just refer to the comment that I made in my presentation about the taking that innovative and adaptable approach. That's one of the things that the group as a whole is very committed to, because we do realise, and if you look at many of the comments and questions that are being asked around the complexity of this particular issue, there is no one-size-fits-all solution to this problem. There is one answer to this problem, and it's going to have to require a whole lot of different solutions statewide. And I'd have to say that the group of people currently at the table, as part of the coalition, are committed to that adaptability, that innovation to try and solve the problem. And we're looking for further people who fit that category. And the terms of reference certainly have been established so that we can pull together a really great bunch of people who can solve some problems and do something about this issue.
Thanks, Andrew. A question from Nick, probably to Trish and to Andrew. I wonder how much of the grassroots food security work is being undertaken by volunteers, and how smaller agencies are coping with the huge increase in demand, as well as the potentially more complex level of need.
Of our 250 agencies that we're supporting every week, as I mentioned, they are the champions. They are the ones that are working on the front line. And I know that they're under huge pressure. We're only really at this point in time, the support that we provide to them, probably meeting about 50% of their daily needs or weekly needs. And they're the ones that are really doing the work, and they certainly are facing some tough times right at the moment. And we are doing all we can to support those community-based agencies, because that's where it happens, at the community level. That's where change happens. It's at that community level, and that's where we're going to see this problem resolved in the future, is when communities come together as one to solve these issues and to stand for beside one another.
Thanks, Andrew. There's another anonymous question. People must have access to healthy, nutritious food, and in crisis times, but what about the risk, essentially, of dependency?
Just wanted to add a little comment on to Andrew's thing, and it comes back to a previous question, David, around it's not one size fits all. And how we address this is governments have to stop over-relying on volunteers. We can pay local people to be part of the solution as well, because it helps lift them out of poverty, and it's common sense. The other question that you just asked now, David, what was that?
The question, and again, it's an underlying existential challenge, which is what happens if we get food dependency from handouts.
Yeah, and that's something that Andrew and I often discuss, and Sandy at our Food Coalition. With the Food Coalition, it's been going a couple of years now, and we've really gained momentum. But the big thing that we've got on it is we understand that we don't want people to become reliant on, which has happened, let's face it, people have become reliant on emergency relief and how to lift them out of that. So our focus is going from that dependency on relief to resilience and sustainability. And we do recognise the danger in it, and unfortunately, it's been a problem that's been exacerbating over the years, particularly following COVID lockdown, as Sandy demonstrated in her original slides there. The quick reactive solutions aren't helpful, you know. So we believe that projects like the farm, and as Andrew's talked about, local solutions helps. But I think the government needs to look at other solutions, like work for the dole projects aren't really work for the dole. People don't get paid a minimum wage when they're put into this. So that if the government thinks outside the box and starts looking at really workable solutions, because when you invest in your local community with employment, you're investing in your local people, and you're lifting them out of that poverty state.
Okay.
If I might just comment, there are many answers to that question, obviously, and I think that many of the answers are community-based, as we've talked about over and over again. One incredible example I might just very briefly touch on is the recent school lunch program that Loaves and Fishes and School Food Matters are working collaboratively on. And some of the both anecdotal and collected feedback and collected results that we're seeing from that, where young children are going home to their parents who reportedly have never cooked a meal before, and they're saying, hey, I want to have some of that food that I had at school. Parents are coming back to those schools and they're asking the teaching staff, can you please provide us with the recipes? Can you please provide us with some of the ingredients? And can you educate and help us how to cook those meals and how to prepare those meals? And now we're seeing parents who have never cooked before, both feeding their children and cooking. These are the type of changes that we need to pursue. They aren't things that happen overnight. They are things that take a lot of hard work and a lot of time to establish. But there are certainly examples, and I think it would be fair to say that certainly everybody who makes up the Tasmanian Food Security Coalition are committed to long-term change and certainly making sure that we do not create dependency.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm conscious of time, so I'd like to conclude firstly by thanking our speakers, Sandy, Andrew, Trish and Elena. Thanks very much for your contribution. Thanks everyone for coming along. The events talk will be available soon as a podcast and a video. You can find links to these and many others on the Island of Ideas website, which is now up on your screen. You can register for the upcoming events in the Island of Ideas series on this site, or you can go to the link provided in the chat. Our next event will take place in a very different journey. Join a panel of experts on Wednesday, the 7th of June for Beyond Earth to Our Future in Space. If you're lucky enough to join us in person, we'll provide complimentary refreshments for the event. Learn about extracting resources from the moon, possibly to address food security, the challenges of space junk and what the latest developments might mean for Tasmania and our future on Earth. It's not one to be missed. Thanks again for joining us this evening. We wish you all the best and hope to see you soon. On behalf of my fellow speakers and the University of Tasmania, good night.